You know that exact feeling, right? You leave a room, close the door behind you, and you just collapse. Not physically, but neurologically. In fact, do me a favor right now, literally drop your shoulders. Feel that? Notice how tense they just were. That is exactly what I'm talking about. Welcome to this explainer, where we're digging into that intense, completely private experience. Your brain is totally spent. You just had what seemed like a perfectly normal social interaction, maybe a work meeting, maybe just grabbing coffee with a friend. But right now, your brain is replaying every tiny micro-stutter, every slightly delayed response, and it's presenting all of it to you as undeniable evidence of a total social catastrophe. And why? Because the energy required to maintain the version of yourself you just presented, it completely exceeded your capacity.
Okay, let's dive into this, because here is the central paradox we really need to decode today. The interaction actually succeeded. The other person? They left thinking everything was completely fine. The disconnect we're exploring isn't in your actual performance. It lies entirely in how your brain processes that performance after the fact. And it all comes down to the invisible energy you just expended. You're exhausted because, whether you realize it or not, you were running this massive secondary operating system in the background the entire time.
Researchers call this camouflaging or masking. See, your brain naturally wants to move, to associate freely, to look around. But our professional and social cultures demand a very linear, very still type of attention. So you adapt. You actively suppress the urge to fidget. You force yourself to maintain eye contact. You script conversations in your head before they even happen, literally like a director of a play that nobody else knows they're in. You're constantly monitoring your tone. You pretend to follow a long discussion when, let's be honest, your focus slipped 3 minutes ago. But here is the critical insight. Pretending to pay attention actually consumes the exact cognitive resources you need for genuine attention. You are using so much brain power just to manage the outward appearance of listening that you completely miss the social cues signaling genuine connection.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is a metaphor from recent psychological literature published in Frontiers that perfectly names this cognitive glitch. They call it the floating duck syndrome. Think about it. From above the water, the duck appears to be gliding effortlessly, right? It looks peaceful, perfectly adapted. But right below the surface, completely hidden from view, it is paddling furiously just to stay afloat. When you mask your ADHD, you are the duck. You're maintaining this outward appearance of high competence, but you are exerting a disproportionate, entirely invisible amount of effort to manage your symptoms right below the surface.
And this brings us to what's called the illusion of transparency. Outwardly, you appear polished, competent, but inwardly, it's forced regulation, it's high cognitive load, it's chaos. And because you feel that internal chaos so intensely, you just naturally assume it must be radiating from your face. You assume everyone else in the room can see the vigorous paddling, but they can't. Observers only process your words and your outward calm. Because you're using so much energy to mask, you fall into a cognitive throttle. You literally miss the signs that they actually liked you. While you were certain they saw a meltdown, they simply listened to your words, they didn't see the internal regulation at all.
But listen, this invisible effort, it is absolutely not free. It comes with a massive psychological receipt. Researchers at Simon Fraser University mapped out exactly what this does to adults with ADHD. Sustained efforts to suppress your natural behaviors drastically increase your cognitive load. It spikes generalized anxiety scores because you're living in this chronic fear of being found out. It elevates depression scores due to just utter exhaustion and feeling inauthentic. So while masking might help you survive a neurotypical world in the short term, it is quietly burning you out in the long term, leaving you with a deep uncertainty about who you actually are. Imposter syndrome goes through the roof. Just listen to this quote from a 38-year-old male participant in that SFU study. He said, "I will nod my head like I understand, but have no idea what was just said, which leads me to making mistakes." Man, that is a profound moment of tragic optimism. It so deeply validates exactly what you might be going through. It highlights this brutal irony of masking. The massive effort you put in to appear competent is exactly what robs you of your actual competence. You are nodding to look like you understand, but the energy you spent focusing on nodding means you completely missed the actual instructions.
So to understand why you always feel like you failed after an interaction, we have to look at the mechanics of your brain. Your brain runs on predictive models, what scientists call Bayesian updating. Basically, it takes what it already believes and uses it to predict what's going to happen next. If you carry the weight of societal stigma around ADHD, that stigma literally becomes your prior belief. You enter a room expecting to be judged. Therefore, your hypervigilant brain flags every tiny pause or microstutter as a catastrophic failure because it's actively looking for threats. It's not a broken brain. It's just a highly protective system that is unfortunately flagging false positives based on fear rather than the actual welcoming smile of the person sitting across from you.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a really complex cycle known as the imposter loop. It starts when the masking actually works. You have a successful interaction. But almost immediately, that success feels entirely fake, right? Because you know the real you was hidden away, paddling furiously beneath the surface. So feeling like a fraud who just somehow tricked everyone, you mask even harder the next time to protect the standing you feel you didn't really earn. Ultimately, your cognitive resources completely deplete, leading right to that devastating post-social crash. The very effectiveness of your mask is exactly what traps you in the exhaustion.
Now, if you are sitting there right now thinking you are the only one who does this, look at the statistical reality. In a recent peer-reviewed study of over 200 adults with ADHD, an astounding 91.6% of them reported that they camouflage their traits to fit in. Think about that number. They rehearsed conversations in the shower, they locked down their hands so they don't fidget, they built elaborate, exhausting systems to hide their natural chaos. You are not a solitary fraud. You are part of an overwhelming majority who are all just trying to navigate a world that wasn't built for how their brains work.
And this brilliantly illustrates that masking is not a personal character flaw. Not at all. It is an ingrained, systemic adaptation to neurotypical norms. When over 90% of a group has to hide their natural traits just to feel safe or employable, we are no longer looking at an individual glitch, folks. We are looking at a highly logical survival strategy in response to intense environmental pressure. But knowing this exact mechanism, that gives you the incredible power to finally interrupt the cycle.
Which is exactly why I want to give you a really explicit, highly effective micro-action to use next time this happens. The key here is conscious expectancy. Just knowing how your brain is glitching is what stops the glitch. So next time you feel that post-social crash coming on, first, physically recognize it in your body. Then, deliberately label it. Actually say to yourself, this is floating duck syndrome. Naming it actively interrupts your brain's error-checking loop. Then, consciously accept that the interaction succeeded. They heard your words, they did not see you paddling. And finally, give yourself permission to recover. Trust me, it works.
Because here is the bottom line. Looking fine does not equal feeling supported. For years, you might have confused the two. You thought if you looked fine, everything was okay, even while you were literally drowning on the inside. Your mental error checking didn't fail you. The mask worked. But it only worked because the immense cost of your effort remained totally invisible to the rest of the room. So the next time you collapse after a conversation, I want you to reframe it. That recovery time, it is not a sign of failure. It is empirical evidence of the massive heroic effort you put in simply to show up. So, what if looking fine just isn't the goal anymore? What if we stop paddling so hard and start letting them see the real you?